Hi there, welcome to another episode of Harrison Hobbies. Today we are going to be looking at Milwaukee's M18 Air Compressor. Now, for starters here, this isn't going to be a super comprehensive review because plenty of those exist from YouTubers that are much more reputable than I am. However, today we are going to be looking at a special feature, which would be what does it take to get this thing to be able to plug into a wall. So if you've been keeping up with any of my videos, you will have seen this in a video in the past, right? A 120 volt AC mains adapter into a Milwaukee adapter. So what we're going to try to do today is we'll unbox this. We will try to run it on, losing it. We'll try to run it on a standard kit 2 amp hour battery, 1.5 amp hour actually. So one of the small, I think these have 5 cells in them, 5 little 18650s, and then one of Milwaukee's larger 9 amp hour. So we've made one clarification to the box here, and that's important. It's an important differentiation here, and that is up to unlimited nails per charge. So in order to kind of support that claim here, we're going to probably open up the petcock, and then we'll let the air compressor run for 15 or 20 minutes to simulate what it might be like if it were actually plugged into mains getting a full use. Additionally, the main competitor to this, at least in my book, for conventional would be the Senko 1 gallon air compressor here. So again, we're not going to do any testing of decibels, loudness, because I think that's super subjective to the environment you're in, whether you're in a shop or out in the open. But as our ears hear it, or as the microphone in this case hears it, we'll look at charge cycles and some other minor features if we see anything that sticks out. And I will note that I haven't even opened up the Milwaukee compressor yet. I've had it now for like 2 weeks and I've been itching to do it. So I'm here in the shop now. So let's get into it. Okay, so traditional, typical unboxing here. Nothing special. Let's see what we got. Oh my goodness, it's heavy. So just to note here, this is a 2 gallon versus the Senko that is a 1 gallon. The Senko is relatively popular because it was relatively low cost, it's lightweight, it's very quiet. So we'll see how that competes. Looks like we got a booted switch here, so that should be helping to prevent dust. We've got our tank pressure gauge right here, and then instead of having a traditional dial here for an analog dial for what our line pressure is, we just have just a readout. So interesting strategy, but let's see how it does. So we can start out with the big battery, since ideally this should work pretty well. Again, just for reference, we're at a full charge. So we'll plop that in. And it's pretty quiet. So you can hear the relay in there click on, and then the motor turns on. So it looks like there's a little bit of a lag there. Interesting. And then that's fine. Okay, and then we got a nice oversized petcock here versus one of the ones that you have to thread in and out. It's just got a lever. That actually charged up pretty quickly. So we'll compare that to the 1 horse, and I mean for a long time, or not 1 horse, sorry, 1 gallon, and for a long time the Senko was pretty much one of the quietest ones out on the market. I mean, there were like CA air systems and some of those, but from like a mass market perspective, the Senko was the cheapest. This one, again, has a lot of hours on it. So, I think the rings on the piston are probably starting to go. So really it did need to be retired, but we'll start them both up and we'll see whether our 2 gallon is faster than our 1 gallon after the 1 gallon here is relatively well used. So realistically, they're both pretty darn similar in terms of loudness. This is a much lower frequency versus the Senko that's a little bit higher. We got 40 PSI here, and we've got pretty close to 40 here. So we'll let them go for another couple of seconds. So I would say that they are both basically requiring the same amount of charge time. Again, the Senko here only had to charge 1 gallon versus this one that actually did 2. So I guess you could say the Milwaukee is actually twice as quick. And then in terms of battery level, we're still at 4 bars on the M18, 9 amp hour. So we will, I guess we'll go in, we'll open up the petcock, we'll drain it out, and then we'll try to run it on the 1.5 amp hour and see how that does, knowing that the 1.5 amp hour is, it's probably one of my first batteries, so it doesn't have a lot of longevity left, but we'll see how it does. Cool. So we got that empty now. We'll put in the battery here. We heard it just click on, so we'll turn it on again. So it certainly doesn't sound like it's running quite as strong. You can see, hopefully you can see that, but we've got 1 bar that's blinking, so we are pulling 100% of what that battery has to offer, and it didn't get very far. So we'll try it one more time here. So this one probably not very good. It's still got 2 bars left, so I mean obviously it's got some. Let's try an EPON battery here. These are the Super Chinas that have relatively decent results. And then this is the, I guess, the basis for the adapter that I've built. So we'll plug this guy in. Sounds like quite a bit, oh no. We've gotten up to 40 PSI. So we're by no means close up. Whenever you do that, I think it restarts the battery. So you can tell by the frequency it's really starting to bog down here, so that compressor's having to work quite a bit harder. That's as far as it went here. It got up to 90 PSI instead of 140. Start it here, see if we got a little bit more. It's really starting to bog. So we tried it now to run this thing a couple of times on the 2.5 amp hour Amazon knockoff battery, as well as the 1.5 that's a few years old. Again, I'm by no means a contractor using my tools every day. I'm more of a, once every couple of weeks kind of guy. But, Milwaukee's slogan of like 1 battery, 200 tools doesn't really hold true here, right? You're really not going to be able to do this off the kit batteries that you get, the low-end brushed Milwaukee's that probably everyone started out building their sets with. It's not a bad air compressor, right? And you're not going to be able to overcome physics. There's a lot of work that needs to go into, filling a volume like this and keeping the compressor going at a reasonable speed. So, physics is physics. But let's, I guess, in the interest of seeing how we can do, let's plug it in to the adapter here. So now that we've kind of looked at lay of the land here with what batteries work and what don't, let's pull this out. We'll get some, I guess, measurements on what it actually takes to keep it going. So we'll, again, use our wall adapter here, and then we'll get a reading on what kind of current draw we get, and then we'll let it run for 15-20 minutes and see how warm it gets. So let's get going. Okay, petcock is closed. We have the thing off. It's at 0 PSI right now, and so we can see here we're pulling 0 amps, 18 volts, 18.2 volts out of there. So let's turn it on and see what happens. So this may be the very first M18 compressor that's powered by wall, but as we can see here, we're got down, so we have a little bit of sag here, a couple of, fraction of a volt, and then we're pulling about 310, 312 watts. So that makes sense, right? The wattage right there continues to climb as the pressure builds and that motor's having to work harder. So we are now at about 70 PSI at around 380 watts, 80 PSI at about 400, .90 PSI at about 400 watts, So it looks like it must peak out at about 400 and then basically it's stopping. So now we're at about 110 PSI at still about 400 watts. $120 at also 400 watts. We are at 130 PSI at 400 watts. And we're coming up on about 400 PSI also at 400 watts. So it looks like it climbs up from the low 300s up to about 400 watts. And then it holds there for roughly half of the dial. Feeling this, it feels pretty cool to the touch. We'll pull out the flare here and see what kind of heat signature we're getting. I realize it's got a lot of shrouding, but right there we were around 108, 100-ish, yeah, 108-ish for the top of the head right here. And then everything else looks to be relatively cool. This side should also probably be hot with the head there. But still not too terrible, 105-ish degrees. So let's let it run now for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back here in a few and then see how it's doing. So I've been letting the thing run for about 2 minutes here, and it just turned off. So the compressor's been completely empty. It's warm to the touch, but it's certainly not hot. So reading through here, I'm not seeing, unless I'm missing a heading or something like that, I'm not seeing any indication that this thing has a timeout. But looking at the amount of circuitry that we saw earlier on, there very well could be a timer here where the system's going to have a counter for how long the motor's on, and to prevent frying a battery, it'll automatically shut off. So, you know, I mean, I think everybody's been thinking, man, I wish Milwaukee made a plug-in version of this. This may be the first application where our wall adapter, which it is running on right now, isn't very well suited to this application. I plug in my quick connect here. Wow, that is not very stout. I don't know if you can see that here, but this entire unit flexes quite a bit. Okay, this 328, we'll cycle this again for a couple minutes here, and we'll see if it's actually, is the brain box here actually tied into our pressure gauge? Are we looking at that? And so it can detect the level, and we'll see. We made it up to about 110 there, and again, we'll drop it down to 70. Okay, so it just timed out. So we made it up to about 75 there. We're not hitting like pressure and it's turning off. It is timing out. Maybe out more. That looks better. Okay, yeah, so right here we're at about 122. We were at about 125 a couple of seconds ago. So it really does look like it times out pretty quickly. I want to point out this little disclaimer right here. Do not use a battery or tool that is damaged or modified. So I feel like Milwaukee's kind of calling me out on that one for our AC adapter setup, but that's okay. Well, there we have it. We have, as far as I know, this is the first Milwaukee M18 air compressor that we can plug into a wall. We've learned a couple of things about it. First off, this motor has an observed duty cycle here, so if we're exceeding it, you're not going to go. So on a system like this that always has battery availability, and you maybe have a crew working off of this, you know, all using these with a manifold on the end, you know, either running maybe roofing nailers or high flow rate like a blow-off gun or something, we're going to be tripping the duty cycle of the motor, so it's going to want to turn off. That duty cycle is going to be a lot different than on something like the Senko we looked at a few minutes ago. That, I mean, in my experience, you can have that thing run for an hour at a time and, you know, yeah, it gets hot, but not a big deal. To show that, you know, kind of issue, you've got on here, you've got rubber hoses instead of on a Senko or, you know, the higher end models of air compressor, you know, they've got copper lines. Again, the air coming out of these should never be really hot enough to run into that issue, but it does speak to the duty cycle of this. And am I going to fault Milwaukee for that? No, absolutely not, right? This air compressor is not meant to work on an AC adapter. Will it? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we just showed it did. I've been using this, this adapter here on my miter saw now for the past few weeks. I've made a ton of cuts. It's held up really, really well. So it is a solid alternative to the batteries. And so on something like this, you know, you're probably fine. But you need to realize here, this isn't a standard air compressor that you would be buying at the Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever you go to be using in your shop. Maybe you've got your small air compressor that's feeding an auxiliary tank that's like a 50-gallon or something like that. So, you know, you let your air compressor run for 30 minutes or an hour or something, burn off those rings, and have a bigger tank. It's certainly got a use, right? It's portable. I mean, I would say it is larger than my Senko, but it is a 2-gallon. It weighs, I would say it probably weighs a little bit more than the Senko, but again, you got more hardware. So overall, I guess first off, do I regret buying the air compressor here? No, not at all. Not having to search for an outlet is going to be great. Run extension cords whenever I'm installing molding or something like that in the house. And, you know, we got to play with the inverter here, so that's always fun. So overall, I think it was a good buy. Overall, we can run it with the AC adapter here, no problem. And I guess I've got my new shop air compressor. So thanks for watching, and check back soon for more videos.